In the hills of Arkansas, 1893, winter had finally loosened its icy grip, leaving the landscape a patchwork of melting snow and muddy trails. Eleanor Grayson, a widow of barely 30, lived alone in a small, weather-beaten cabin at the edge of the forest. Her husband, Thomas, had died suddenly the previous winter during a particularly cruel storm, leaving Eleanor with nothing but memories and a hollow ache in her chest. The townsfolk spoke about her in whispers, casting cautious glances toward her cabin. Children avoided the hill where she lived, calling it the Widow's Hill. People said strange things about her, rumors that she painted her walls with milk and blood, but no one dared ask, and Eleanor preferred it that way. She was not a woman of madness, despite the whispers. She was a woman of memory, of devotion, and of grief so intense that it transformed her home into a shrine of life and loss. Eleanor's cabin was modest, with walls warped by time and a roof that groaned under winter snow. Inside, the air was thick with an unusual scent, a mix of sweet milk and the metallic tang of iron. Every corner of the room seemed deliberate, every object a memory. The walls, streaked with the faintest traces of white milk, seemed almost to glow in the dim candlelight. Eleanor worked silently. The milk on the walls was not an accident, it was a ritual. Each stroke represented a memory of Thomas, the way he smiled while whittling wood, the gentle sound of his voice calling her name, and the blood. The blood was hers, a painful reminder that life is fragile, that grief is sharp, and that even in sorrow we must remember to endure. The people in the valley whispered constantly about Eleanor. "She's gone mad with grief," they said. "They say she paints with blood, like some old pagan ritual. Mothers used her name as a cautionary tale. Be careful, children, or you'll end up like her." But the whispers never touched Eleanor. She carried on her ritual with quiet determination. What they called madness, she knew was purpose. She was teaching herself, day by day, to live in the shadow of loss. She was reminding herself, and someday, perhaps others, that grief could be transformed into something meaningful. 9-year-old Lila May was a curious girl with eyes too bright for her age. She had long been intrigued by the stories of the widow on the hill. One spring afternoon, when the sun cast golden rays over the melting snow, Lila found herself wandering close to Eleanor's cabin. The door creaked as she knocked timidly. Eleanor opened it slowly, surprised to see a visitor. She expected fear or mockery, but instead found wonder in the child's wide eyes. I just wanted to see," Lila stammered. Eleanor studied her for a long moment. Finally, she smiled faintly. "Come in," she said. And with that, Lila stepped inside a world that no other child in the valley had dared to enter. Eleanor led Lila to a wooden table and poured a small pitcher of milk into a shallow bowl. She handed the girl a brush. "See this milk?" Eleanor asked softly. "It nourishes life. Even in grief, we must remember life with careful strokes." Eleanor painted shapes and symbols on the walls. Each stroke represented a memory of Thomas, simple, beautiful moments that made her heart ache and glow at the same time. Lila watched, mesmerized, realizing that the walls were not random, they were stories. The milk brought life to her memories, softening the sharp edges of sorrow. Then Eleanor took a small knife and pricked her finger, letting a few drops of blood fall onto the walls. The crimson drops glimmered in the sunlight streaming through the window. "This," she whispered, "is sacrifice. Pain doesn't vanish, child. It shapes us, molds us, and reminds us we are alive." Lila shivered but didn't turn away. She watched in awe as Eleanor continued to blend milk and blood, sorrow and memory into a tapestry that told the story of love, loss, and resilience. For the first time, the child understood. What people feared as madness was actually courage, an intimate conversation with life itself. Word spread through the town like wildfire. Eleanor had allowed a child inside her cabin. "She's dangerous," one neighbor muttered. "You shouldn't let anyone near her." But Lila returned home that day with eyes alight and heart racing. "She's not scary," she told her mother. "She's teaching me something beautiful." Her words echoed through the town, challenging fear with curiosity. Sometimes, courage and curiosity can see truths that fear blinds us to. Over the next few weeks, Lila returned often. Eleanor shared stories of Thomas, how he laughed at the river, how he whistled in the morning light, how he always saved the best pie for Eleanor. Each memory was painted on the walls with milk. Each sorrow was marked with blood. Lila listened and learned about love, loss, and resilience. She began to understand that mourning could be an act of beauty rather than despair, and that grief, when approached with care, could become a bridge to understanding life more deeply. One afternoon, Eleanor let Lila dip her own hand into a bowl of milk. Together, they traced tiny symbols and patterns on the walls. Lila's laughter echoed through the cabin, breaking the heavy silence that had long enveloped the widow's home. Eleanor felt a warmth she hadn't known since Thomas's death. In the child's curiosity and joy, she rediscovered a spark of life. Her grief remained, but it no longer consumed her entirely. It could coexist with love, joy, and hope. One stormy evening, thunder rolled across the hills, shaking the cabin. Lightning illuminated the walls in jagged flashes, revealing the intricate tapestry of milk and blood. Eleanor recounted the winter Thomas died, every moment of pain and helplessness, every quiet hour of longing. Lila held Eleanor's hand tightly, feeling the intensity of a life lived with love and loss. "I won't forget," she said softly. And Eleanor realized that her pain, once private and all-consuming, could be transformed into something lasting. Her grief could teach, inspire, and guide. Even in sorrow, there was purpose. The spring sun was gentle, but the winds carried whispers through the valley. One morning, Mr. Halloran, a stern man known for his rigid beliefs, marched up the hill toward Eleanor's cabin. He had heard from neighbors that the widow had allowed a child inside and feared the worst. "I must know," he muttered to himself, "what sort of madness she practices." He arrived at Eleanor's door with an air of authority. Eleanor opened it calmly, her hand still marked with the faint stains of milk and blood. "I've come to see what this is," he barked. Eleanor's gaze met his, steady and unwavering. "This is my grief," she said softly, "and my memory. No harm comes to anyone here. These walls carry lessons, not curses." Mr. Halloran's eyes narrowed. He expected fear, repentance, perhaps even insanity. Instead, he found strength, purpose, and quiet dignity. He left that day unsettled, realizing that what he feared was not madness, but courage. As the season changed, Eleanor began incorporating elements of the forest into her work. She crushed berries, mixed mud, and added plant pigments to the milk and blood on her walls. "Life leaves traces everywhere," she told Lila, "and so must we, in ways that honor it." The cabin became a living gallery, each painting a story of grief, transformed into compassion. Lila helped, laughing as she learned to mix colors from nature, turning the walls into a tapestry that was as much about life as it was about death. Word spread, and slowly, people came, not in fear, but in curiosity. Mothers brought children, elders sought wisdom. Eleanor's grief, once isolating, became a beacon of understanding. Time had a quiet way of shifting perceptions. The town, once fearful, began to see Eleanor not as a woman consumed by madness, but as someone who had embraced sorrow and transformed it into teaching. People who once whispered now nodded respectfully. Children came to watch, mothers to learn, and the elderly to reflect. Eleanor taught them that grief could be expressed without shame, that sorrow could guide, and that even in the darkest times, compassion could bloom. The Widow's Hill became a place where humanity revealed itself in milk-streaked walls and blood-dotted murals, a sanctuary for hearts seeking understanding. One afternoon, Eleanor began painting names on the walls. Her parents, neighbors, lost to time, Thomas, animals that had wandered past the cabin, and even friends long forgotten. Milk for life remembered, blood for sacrifices honored. Lila helped carefully trace small symbols beside each name, connecting the living and the departed. Every stroke of paint was a heartbeat, every crimson drop a whispered memory. The walls had transformed from private grief to a living record of love, loss, and resilience. It became a place of reflection, where each visitor could feel the depth of life's fragility and beauty. Years later, long after Eleanor had passed, a stranger stumbled upon the cabin. At first, the walls seemed grotesque, milk-streaked with red drops. But as he examined the intricate designs and names, he realized it was a chronicle of life itself. Every symbol told a story. Courage in the face of loss, love remembered, lessons learned. The widow's ritual was no longer secret. It had become a message for anyone willing to see. The stranger left with a heart stirred, carrying Eleanor's hidden teachings into the world. Even in grief, there is meaning, and even in sorrow, there is beauty. As winter crept in one year, Eleanor fell ill. Her strength waned, and she knew her time in the world was drawing to a close. She called Lila to her side, now a young teenager, and handed her a small leather-bound book she had painted herself. "This is yours now," Eleanor whispered. "Take it, and remember that grief can teach, love can heal, and courage comes from facing the darkest days." Tears filled Lila's eyes as she clutched the gift. She promised that she would continue the work, honoring Eleanor's lessons and sharing them with others. Eleanor's last act was to paint one final wall. Her trembling hands traced words that would outlive her: grieve with purpose, love with courage, live with honor. The crimson drops of her final sacrifice mingled with milk, streaked memories of joy and love. She completed the mural quietly, sat back, and closed her eyes. She passed away as the sun set over the hills, her life now immortalized in walls that had once been feared but were now revered. In the years that followed, the cabin became a local landmark. People came from miles around to witness the walls, to hear the story of the widow who transformed grief into art, fear into understanding, and pain into teaching. Children traced the painted names and symbols with their fingers, learning empathy, courage, and the quiet strength of life. Eleanor's story inspired the town, teaching that sorrow need not destroy. It can create, connect, and uplift. Lila, now a young woman, returned often to the cabin, sometimes alone, sometimes with visitors she guided gently. She painted with milk and, on solemn occasions, with a tiny drop of blood, honoring the lessons Eleanor had passed on. She invited others to share stories, to write names on the walls, and to express grief and love in ways that healed rather than harmed. The cabin had evolved into a sanctuary of human experience, a living archive of resilience and hope, carrying Eleanor's message forward to every visitor who entered. Even today, the cabin remains on the hills of Arkansas, standing as a testament to a woman who refused to let grief consume her entirely. The walls, streaked with milk and blood, are no longer terrifying. They are sacred. Travelers, townsfolk, and children leave with hearts stirred, inspired to live fully, love deeply, and honor the memories of those they have lost. Eleanor's life, once shadowed by pain, became a beacon. She taught the world that even in sorrow there is hope, and even in mourning there is art. And somewhere, high on the hill, the wind whispers through the trees, carrying her legacy. Grieve with purpose, love with courage, live with honor.